My stepmother, Veronica, thought she'd won when she stood up at my divorce party, raised her champagne glass, and announced to 40 relatives that I was just another man who couldn't keep a woman satisfied. But she didn't know my 8-year-old daughter, Hazel, had been recording her for weeks. The party was supposed to be a simple family gathering, maybe some beer and barbecue in the backyard, but Veronica had turned it into her personal victory lap. She stood there in her designer dress, the one she bought with my father's credit card last month, holding court like she was giving a TED Talk on why I was destined to fail at marriage. "Some people just don't have what it takes," she said, making sure everyone could hear her. "Poor Garrett here, bless his heart, he tried so hard to be something he's not." I sat on my father's worn leather couch, my daughter Hazel pressed against my side, her small fingers wrapped around her tablet. She was watching Veronica with those sharp green eyes she got from her mother, the ones that seemed to see everything and forget nothing. At 8 years old, she understood more than most adults gave her credit for. She understood that Grandma Veronica wasn't really her grandma, just the woman who married Grandpa Dennis 7 years ago and had been making our lives miserable ever since. My name is Garrett, and 2 weeks ago I became another divorce statistic. 34 years old, software engineer, father of one brilliant little girl, and according to my stepmother, a complete failure at being a man. The thing is, my divorce wasn't some explosive drama. Brooke and I had simply grown apart, wanted different things from life. We signed papers like adults, worked out custody like parents who still respected each other, and moved forward. But Veronica couldn't let it be that simple. She needed it to be my fault, my failure, my inadequacy. My father, Dennis, sat in his recliner, staring into his beer like it held the secrets of the universe. He was 58 years old, a retired contractor with hands that had built half the houses in our neighborhood, but around Veronica, he became small and quiet. He wouldn't look at me while his wife performed her character assassination for our assembled relatives. "You know what they say," Veronica continued, gesturing with her champagne flute like she was conducting an orchestra of humiliation. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Dennis's brother couldn't keep a woman either. Must be something in the family DNA." My Aunt Ruth, my father's sister, shifted uncomfortably in her seat but nodded along anyway. My Uncle Pete muttered something about compatibility issues to his wife Dottie. My brother Trent kept trying to catch my eye, probably wanting to know if I was okay, but I couldn't look away from the spectacle of my stepmother dismantling my character piece by piece. Hazel shifted beside me, tilting her tablet screen away from anyone who might glance over. She'd been quiet all evening, which wasn't unusual for her. People often mistook her quietness for shyness, but I knew better. Hazel was an observer, a documenter of human behavior. Her third-grade teacher had called her remarkably perceptive at our last parent-teacher conference. If only that teacher could see what Hazel had been perceiving in this house. The room was full of family members who'd known me since I was born, people who'd celebrated my college graduation, my wedding, the birth of my daughter. But tonight, they were all just audience members in Veronica's one-woman show about why Garrett Morrison was destined to disappoint every woman he ever met. The divorce papers had been signed 2 weeks ago in a conference room that smelled like coffee and copy machine toner. Brooke and I sat across from each other at a long mahogany table, our lawyers flanking us like guards at a peaceful surrender. There was no yelling, no accusations, just two people acknowledging that what we'd built together worked better as a foundation for co-parenting than as a marriage. "I want you to know I don't regret it," Brooke had said after signing her name on the final page. "We gave each other Hazel, and that's worth everything." I'd nodded, unable to trust my voice right then. We'd been together 12 years, married for 10, and somewhere along the way we'd become roommates who happened to share a daughter. She wanted adventure, spontaneity, maybe a move to Seattle for her marketing career. I wanted stability, routine, the comfort of knowing what each day would bring. Neither of us was wrong. We were just wrong for each other. The temporary move back to my childhood home made sense financially. The housing market was insane, and I needed time to find the right place for Hazel and me, somewhere with good schools and a backyard where she could practice her soccer moves. My father, Dennis, had immediately offered the guest room. No questions asked, though I could see the worry in his eyes when he helped me carry in the boxes. "This is just temporary, Dad," I'd assured him as we maneuvered my desk through the narrow hallway. 3 months tops. "Take all the time you need, son," he'd said. But his voice carried that particular heaviness of a parent watching their child's life unravel, even when the unraveling was necessary. Veronica had been circling since day one, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against every surface as she made little comments designed to cut just deep enough to sting, but not quite enough to call out. She'd been married to my father for 7 years, and in that time, she'd transformed his house into something from a home decorating magazine. Gone were my mother's handmade quilts and the family photos from our camping trips. In their place were abstract art pieces and color-coordinated throw pillows that no one was actually allowed to lean against. My mother had died when I was 22, a quick and brutal battle with pancreatic cancer that left my father lost and rudderless. He'd met Veronica at a grief support group of all places. She was mourning her second husband, or so she claimed. Within 6 months, she'd moved in. Within a year, they were married. My siblings and I had tried to be happy for him, tried to see what he saw in her, but Veronica made it difficult. She had a gift for saying cruel things with a smile, for making you question whether you'd really heard what you thought you heard. "Garrett's back home, just like when he was 16 and got rejected by the Patterson girl," she'd announced at dinner my first night back, as if my divorce was equivalent to teenage heartbreak. "Some men just aren't meant for commitment. Dennis, pass the salt." My brother Trent had suggested the family gathering as a show of support. He was 2 years younger than me, a successful real estate agent with a perfect family and a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. "You need to be around people who love you," he'd said on the phone. "Let us remind you that you're not alone." My sister Melody, the youngest at 28, had taken charge of organizing everything. She'd always been the family coordinator, the one who remembered birthdays and arranged holiday dinners. Just a casual thing, she'd promised. Some food, some drinks, some laughs, nothing heavy. But Veronica had other plans. She'd insisted on catering, on using the good china, on inviting extended family I hadn't seen in years. The casual gathering had morphed into what she kept calling a transition celebration, which everyone knew was her euphemism for Garrett's failure party. The house filled with relatives clutching plates of food they weren't really eating, making conversation that carefully danced around the obvious. My Uncle Pete talked about the weather. My cousin Jerome discussed baseball statistics. Aunt Dottie complimented the catering. Everyone was trying so hard to be normal that the room felt like a stage play where nobody quite knew their lines. Hazel had been staying with me since Tuesday, part of our custody arrangement. She'd brought her tablet, her stuffed unicorn named Professor Sparkles, and her uncanny ability to make adults uncomfortable with her direct questions. Earlier that day, she'd asked Veronica why she dyed her hair if she was proud of getting older. Veronica's face had gone through 3 shades of red before she'd managed a tight smile and changed the subject. Now, as Veronica held court in the living room, explaining to everyone how she'd seen this coming from the start, I wondered what my mother would have thought of all this. She would have pulled me aside, probably, given me one of her knowing looks, and said something simple that would have made everything clearer. But Mom was gone, and in her place stood Veronica, raising her glass to toast my spectacular failure at marriage, while my 8-year-old daughter sat beside me, quietly recording everything on her tablet. The evening started with subtle jabs disguised as concern. Veronica had positioned herself near the fireplace, the light catching her diamond earrings in a way she'd clearly calculated when choosing her spot. She held her champagne glass like a prop, using it to punctuate her observations about my failed marriage. "Oh, Garrett, maybe you'll find someone more compatible next time," she said, her voice carrying that false sweetness that made my teeth hurt. "Someone who appreciates a quieter lifestyle. You know, someone who doesn't need so much excitement and passion." She emphasized those last words like they were foreign concepts to me, like I was some emotionally stunted robot who couldn't understand basic human desires. The room shifted uncomfortably. My cousin Jerome suddenly became fascinated with his phone. My sister Melody's jaw tightened, but she stayed quiet, probably trying to keep the peace like always. "Brooke always seemed like she had big dreams," my Aunt Ruth chimed in, apparently deciding this was her moment to contribute to my public dissection. Sometimes that doesn't mesh well with someone who prefers to stay in their comfort zone. What comfort zone? I asked, feeling the heat rise in my chest. I work 60 hours a week. I coach Hazel's soccer team. I rebuilt Dad's deck last summer. Which part of that screams comfort zone to you? Veronica laughed, that tinkling fake laugh she'd perfected at whatever finishing school spawned her. Oh, sweetheart, we're not talking about physical activity. We're talking about emotional availability, spiritual connection, that special something that makes a woman feel alive. Brooke needed someone who could match her energy, her vibrancy. You barely knew Brooke, I pointed out. She came to maybe 3 family dinners in the last 2 years. Exactly my point, Veronica exclaimed, as if I'd just proven her thesis. She was already pulling away. A woman doesn't avoid her husband's family unless she's deeply unsatisfied with the husband himself. My Uncle Pete nodded sagely, like this was profound wisdom instead of manipulative garbage. Women have intuition about these things, he said. They know when something's missing. What was missing was compatibility, I said, trying to keep my voice level. We wanted different things. That's not a failure, it's just life. Veronica waved her hand dismissively. That's what people say when they don't want to admit the truth. You know what Brooke told me at last year's Christmas party? She felt like she was drowning in suburbs and routine. A woman needs excitement, passion, adventure. She needs a man who can match her intensity, who can surprise her, who can make her feel like the only woman in the world. This was pure fiction. Brooke had spent exactly 5 minutes at last year's Christmas party before leaving with a migraine that I now suspected was strategic, but the room was eating it up. Aunt Dottie was nodding along, my father's golf buddy. Richard muttered something about keeping the spark alive. Some men just have it and some don't, Veronica continued, really warming to her theme now. It's not something you can learn or fake. Either you can satisfy a woman's needs, all of her needs, or you can't. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a toxic fire. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, but nobody defended me. Nobody stood up and said this was inappropriate. They just sat there, spectators at my execution. My father, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up, but not in my defense. Sometimes these things run in families, he muttered into his beer. My brother Carl couldn't keep a woman either. Went through 3 wives before he gave up. Dad, Melody protested, that's not fair. What? I'm just saying facts. Some men are built for marriage, some aren't. Better to know which one you are early on. Save everyone the trouble. Veronica actually laughed at that. A genuine laugh this time, ugly and triumphant. No surprise, really. He could never satisfy a real woman because he never learned how to be a real man. These modern sensitive types think talking about feelings is enough. Newsflash. Women need more than conversation and help with the dishes. My hands were shaking now. Hazel must have felt it because she scooted closer, her small hand finding mine under the table. Her tablet was balanced on her knee, screen tilted at an angle I couldn't see. I mean, look at him. Veronica gestured at me like I was an exhibit. 34 years old, living in his father's guest room, sharing custody of a child who probably wondered why mommy stopped loving daddy. Though we all know the answer to that, don't we? That's when my father delivered the final blow. He looked up from his beer, his eyes slightly unfocused, and said, "Some people are just born failures when it comes to love. It's not their fault necessarily. It's just genetics, like being short or having brown eyes. Garrett got the failure gene. At least now he knows." The room went silent except for the sound of ice clinking in someone's glass. 40 members of my family had just watched my father call me a genetic failure at love, and not one of them said a word in my defense. Not one of them stood up and walked out. They just sat there, some nodding in agreement, others looking away in discomfort, but still compliance. Hazel squeezed my hand 3 times, our secret signal that meant, "I love you." Then she stood up, all 4 feet of her, wearing her purple butterfly dress and light-up sneakers, and cleared her throat. The room turned to look at her, probably expecting tears or a request to leave. They had no idea what was coming. I was about to stand up, take Hazel, and leave. My keys were in my pocket, my car was outside, and I could have us out of this toxic circus in 30 seconds flat. Let them sit here and dissect my failures without me as their main exhibit. My hand was already on Hazel's shoulder, ready to guide her toward the door when she tugged on my sleeve with surprising urgency. "Daddy, wait," she whispered, her voice calm but insistent. "Trust me." There was something in her eyes, a determination I'd seen before when she was working on a particularly difficult puzzle or trying to master a new soccer move. This wasn't my little girl asking for permission, this was Hazel with a plan. I settled back into my seat, curious despite my anger. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her purple dress with both hands, a gesture so adult it made my chest tight. The room went quiet, 40 pairs of eyes turning toward this small figure in light-up sneakers who commanded attention simply by standing. "Grandma Veronica," she said, her voice clear and steady, each word carefully pronounced. "I made something special for Grandpa Dennis." "Can I show it to everyone?" Veronica's face shifted from triumph to condescension, that fake grandmother smile she wore like a mask whenever other people were watching. She bent forward slightly, the way adults do when they think they're being kind to children but are actually being patronizing. "Oh, sweetie, maybe later," she said, her voice dripping with false honey. "The adults are talking about important things right now. Why don't you go play with your tablet in the other room?" "But it's about love and marriage," Hazel insisted, not moving an inch. "You were just talking about that for the last hour. I've been working on this project for weeks. It's for school, but I think Grandpa Dennis needs to see it now." My father looked up from his beer, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "What kind of project, Princess?" "It's about family dynamics," Hazel said, using the term her teacher had taught her. "Mrs. Henderson said we should document how families work, how they support each other through changes. She said it would help us understand relationships better." Veronica's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Well, that's very nice, dear. But this isn't really the time for school projects. We're having an adult conversation about your father's situation." "My father's situation is part of family dynamics," Hazel replied, her logic as precise as a surgeon's cut. "Mrs. Henderson said divorce affects everyone in a family, not just the people getting divorced. She said children's perspectives matter too. My brother Trent, who had 2 kids of his own and had always been a softie for Hazel, finally spoke up. "Come on, Veronica, let the kids share. Might lighten the mood a bit. God knows we could use it." "I agree," Melody added quickly, probably seeing an opportunity to derail Veronica's cruel monologue. "If Hazel put work into something, we should see it." Veronica's jaw tightened, but with others now supporting the idea, she couldn't refuse without looking like the evil step-grandmother she actually was. She waved her hand in that dismissive way of hers, the diamonds on her rings catching the light. "Fine, dear," she said, settling back into her chair like a queen granting an audience. "What is it exactly? A drawing? A poem? A little essay about families?" Hazel walked to the center of the room with surprising confidence, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. "It's a video project. Mrs. Henderson taught us about documentation and primary sources. She said the best way to understand something is to observe it directly." She moved toward the entertainment center where my father's smart TV sat, surrounded by Veronica's carefully arranged decorative objects. With the efficiency of a generation raised on technology, she found the right cable in the drawer, connected her tablet, and navigated to her files faster than most adults could have managed. "My project is about truth in families," Hazel announced, turning to face everyone. "Mrs. Henderson said sometimes people say one thing but mean another. She called it subtext. She said if we want to understand our families, we need to pay attention to what people say when they think nobody's listening." Veronica's face went pale for just a moment before she recovered. "Well, that sounds very educational. I'm sure your teacher will be impressed." "She already was," Hazel said simply. "I got an A+ and a special commendation for thorough research." My father set down his beer, suddenly more alert. Something in the room had shifted, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air goes electric. Even the relatives who'd been checking their phones were now paying attention. "The video is 8 minutes long," Hazel said, her finger hovering over the play button. "But I think everyone should see the whole thing, especially you, Grandpa Dennis. because it's about love and family and the difference between what people say in public and what they really think. She pressed play before anyone could object, and the screen came to life with shaky footage clearly filmed from a low angle. The timestamp in the corner showed 3 weeks ago. Veronica's voice, crystal clear and unmistakable, filled the room from the TV speakers. The 40 relatives who'd been so comfortable dissecting my failures were about to get an education in truth from an 8-year-old with a tablet and a sense of justice. The video started with shaky footage filmed from behind the kitchen counter, the camera clearly held at Hazel's height. The timestamp showed 3 weeks ago, 7:43 p.m. Veronica's voice filled the room from the TV speakers, sharp and venomous, nothing like the honeyed tone she used in public. I swear to God, Dennis, if you bring up that pathetic son of yours one more time at dinner, I'm done. The man's a walking disappointment, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. The room gasped collectively. On screen, my father's voice responded weakly. Ronnie, please, he's having a hard time with the divorce. Hard time? He's always having a hard time. First, he couldn't get into a decent college, had to settle for state school. Then he couldn't keep a promotion at that mediocre tech company. Now he can't keep a wife. Face it, Dennis, you raised a loser. The sooner you accept that, the better off we'll all be. The scene cut abruptly. New timestamp. 2 weeks ago, 2:15 p.m. Veronica was on the phone in the living room, her voice crystal clear as she paced near where Hazel must have been sitting with her tablet. Oh, Marge, you'll never guess. The divorce is final. I give Garrett 2 months before he's crying himself to sleep in Dennis's basement, probably hugging that ratty college sweatshirt like the man-child he is. Some men just aren't meant to succeed. It's almost sad, except it's also exactly what I expected. Another cut. 1 week ago, 11:30 a.m., Veronica and her friend Kendra in the kitchen, the sound of coffee cups clinking. Veronica's voice was animated, gossipy, cruel. The best part is watching Dennis finally realize his precious son is exactly like his deadbeat brother. Genetic failure, I call it. At least my kids from my first marriage turned out successful, Stanford and Yale. But Dennis's kids? Community college and state schools. Says everything you need to know about the family tree. The video kept rolling relentlessly. Each clip was worse than the last. Veronica calling me sexually inadequate to her book club ladies, their laughter cackling through the speakers. Poor Brooke probably had to fake it for 10 years. No wonder she ran for the hills. Next clip, Veronica, with her sister Patricia, in the garden. His equipment is probably as disappointing as his personality. You can tell by how he walks. No confidence. Real men move differently. Dennis was probably the same before age caught up with him. Then a clip from 5 days ago, Veronica talking to someone on FaceTime. The little girl is weird too. Hazel barely talks, always staring at people with those creepy eyes, just like her pathetic father. Genetic failure extends to the next generation, apparently. My hands clenched into fists hearing her talk about my daughter that way. Around the room, relatives were shifting uncomfortably, some covering their mouths in shock, others unable to look away from the screen. My father's face had gone from pale to red to something beyond color entirely. But the video wasn't done. The timestamp showed 3 days ago, 4:47 p.m. Veronica in the bedroom, the camera angle suggesting Hazel had been in the hallway. Veronica was on the phone again, her voice lower but still perfectly audible. Of course, Dennis doesn't know about Trevor. The old fool is too busy feeling sorry for his failure of a son to notice I'm gone every Tuesday and Thursday. He actually thinks I'm at Pilates. She laughed, ugly and triumphant. Trevor's half his age and twice the man in every way that counts. The things that 28-year-old can do would give Dennis a heart attack. Thank God for small miracles and large assets, if you know what I mean. The screen went black for a moment, then one final clip appeared. Yesterday afternoon, 3:22 p.m., Veronica was in the garage on the phone, standing near Dennis's workbench. The prenup has a loophole my lawyer found. If Dennis dies before our 10th anniversary, I get everything regardless of the infidelity clause. 3 more years. I can play the devoted wife for 3 more years, especially with Trevor keeping me satisfied on the side. Then I'll be set for life. The house alone is worth $2 million in this market. The video ended. The screen went dark. The room was silent except for the sound of Veronica's champagne glass hitting the hardwood floor, the crystal shattering into pieces that sparkled like tears in the light. Hazel calmly disconnected her tablet, her movements precise and deliberate. She looked directly at Veronica, then at my father, then back to the room full of stunned relatives. "My teacher said documentation helps us understand family dynamics," she said in that same clear, steady voice. "She said we should observe carefully and record accurately. I got an A+ for thoroughness and attention to detail." My father stood up slowly, his contractor's hands shaking for the first time I could remember. His voice, when it came, was barely recognizable. "Tuesday and Thursday Pilates?" Veronica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Dennis, that's edited. That child manipulated the footage. She took things out of context." "Did I, Grandma?" Hazel asked, her innocence so perfectly pitched I almost believed it myself. "Should I show the other videos? The ones from the parking lot of the gym? Mr. Trevor drives a blue Mercedes, right? The one with the license plate that says HOTTRE? Because I have very clear footage of you in that car doing things that definitely aren't Pilates." The room exploded into chaos. Aunt Ruth grabbed her purse and headed for the door, muttering about disgraceful behavior and attending church tomorrow. Uncle Pete suddenly found his shoes incredibly fascinating, studying them like they held the secrets to quantum physics. My cousins were split between recording on their phones and trying to become invisible, shrinking into the couch cushions as if they could disappear entirely. Jerome actually started a slow clap before his mother smacked his arm. "Not the time," she hissed, but I caught him giving Hazel a thumbs up behind his back. Veronica turned on Hazel with pure venom in her eyes. "You sneaky little brat! You've been spying on me like some kind of stalker." That's when I stood up, my protective instincts overriding everything else. "Don't you dare speak to my daughter that way." "Not ever. Your daughter just ruined my marriage." Veronica shrieked, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "No," Dennis said quietly, and something in his voice made everyone freeze. It was the voice he'd used when he was building houses, when a contractor tried to cut corners or use substandard materials. It was the voice of a man who'd finally reached his limit. "You did that yourself. Every word, every action, every Tuesday and Thursday, get out of my house. Dennis, please, we can talk about this." Veronica's tone switched to desperation, tears suddenly appearing in her eyes. "Couples therapy. We can work through this. Get out." The roar that came from my quiet father shook the windows. "You have 10 minutes to pack what you can carry. Everything else gets shipped to whatever bridge you crawl under." Veronica grabbed her purse with shaking hands, shot one last venomous look at Hazel and me, and stormed toward the stairs. "You'll hear from my lawyer," she screamed over her shoulder. "Looking forward to it," Dennis called back. "I'm sure he'll love seeing these videos in court." The party dispersed quickly after that. Relatives mumbled excuses and apologies as they fled. My sister Melody hugged me tight and whispered, "Your daughter is my hero," before dragging her shocked husband out the door. Trent stayed behind to help clean up the shattered champagne glass, shaking his head in amazement. Later that night, after the house had emptied and the dishes were done, I tucked Hazel into bed in the guest room. Professor Sparkles, her stuffed unicorn, was positioned carefully on the pillow beside her. "How long have you been recording her?" I asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Since the day Mom and you told me about the divorce," she said matter-of-factly. "Veronica said mean things about you when she thought I wasn't listening. She called you pathetic while I was doing homework at the kitchen table. She laughed about you with her friends while I was reading in the living room. Why didn't you tell me?" She hugged Professor Sparkles closer. "Because you always say, 'Actions have consequences, Daddy.' You say we should let people show us who they really are." I wanted her actions to have consequences, real ones. My father knocked on the doorframe. His eyes were red-rimmed but clearer than I'd seen them in years. "Can I come in?" Hazel patted the bed beside her, and Dennis sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "Garrett, I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have defended you. Tonight and every night before this, I should have seen what she was doing to our family. Dad, you don't have to— No, let me finish. You're not a failure. You never were. Your marriage ended, but you're handling it with grace and dignity. You're a good father, a good man, a better man than I've been. I'm the failure for not seeing what was happening in my own home, for letting that woman poison everything your mother and I built." He looked at Hazel with something like awe. "And you, young lady, are brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. Where did you learn to do all that?" Hazel smiled for the first time all evening. "YouTube tutorials on investigative journalism. And Mrs. Henderson showed us how documentary filmmakers work. She said the camera doesn't lie, it just shows what's already there." "Remind me to send Mrs. Henderson a very nice Christmas gift," Dennis said. 2 months later, Dennis's divorce was finalized. Veronica tried to fight it, but the videos Hazel had carefully backed up to 3 different cloud services made her lawyer advise a quick, quiet settlement. She moved in with Trevor, which lasted exactly 3 weeks before he kicked her out for cheating with his best friend. Last I heard, she was living with her sister in Phoenix, telling everyone her husband had a midlife crisis and threw away their perfect marriage. Dennis started therapy, something he'd never considered before. "Turns out, I have some things to work through," he said simply. He also started dating again. Carefully, meeting a nice woman named Carol at his grief support group, the same one where he'd met Veronica. "This one doesn't hate my kids," he said with a small smile. Already an improvement. "I found an apartment 6 blocks from Dad's house, a 2-bedroom with a backyard perfect for Hazel's soccer practice. Brooke and I maintained our amicable co-parenting relationship, and she actually laughed when she heard about Veronica's downfall. Your daughter is going to change the world someday," she said. "God help anyone who stands in her way." The tablet still sits on Hazel's dresser, though she's moved on to new projects. She started a video series about family rebuilding for her 4th grade presentation. This time, she's filming with permission, mostly. She interviewed Dennis about starting over at 58, and me about co-parenting after divorce. She even got Melody and Trent to talk about supporting family through hard times. Yesterday, I found her teaching Dennis how to play chess in the living room. She'd just beaten him for the 3rd time in a row, and instead of being frustrated, he was beaming with pride. "You know what?" he said, studying the board where his king was thoroughly trapped. "I think the women in this family are the smart ones. Your grandmother would have loved you." "What about Dad?" Hazel asked, already resetting the pieces for another game. Dennis ruffled her hair affectionately. "Your dad's smart enough to raise you." "That makes him the smartest of all. He knew when to let go of what wasn't working and hold tight to what really matters." I watched from the doorway, thinking about failure and success, about marriages that end and families that endure. Veronica had been wrong about everything, but especially about one thing. Some people aren't born failures at love. They're just brave enough to admit when something isn't working and wise enough to protect what truly matters. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest warriors. My 8-year-old daughter taught me that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean throwing punches or raising your voice. Sometimes it means pressing record at the right moment and play at an even better one. Family isn't about perfect marriages or public approval. It's not about meeting someone else's standards or living up to impossible expectations. It's about showing up, standing up, and occasionally having an 8-year-old with a tablet who loves you enough to fight for your honor in her own brilliant, terrifying way. The truth doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to be documented and presented at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you have a daughter who understands that better than most adults ever will. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been unfairly judged by family or found strength in unexpected places, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Like this video if you believe that actions really do have consequences, and that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. Share it with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about families who face hard truths, find unexpected heroes, and rebuild stronger than before. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the best defense is a brilliant 8-year-old with a tablet and a sense of justice.